The sun hung low over Napa Valley, casting everything in a warm golden light that felt like it belonged in a dream. The scent of lilacs and roses mixed in the air, masking the tension in my chest. Callista's wedding was everything she had ever wanted: a show of wealth, power and control. The perfect venue, the perfect guests, the perfect dress. It was all planned with meticulous precision, designed to display the empire she had built. But what no one saw beneath the polished surface was the truth: an empire built on stolen moments, borrowed from the very people who had given her everything, including me. I watched as Callista stood before a room full of people, basking in their praise. Her smile was perfect, her words rehearsed. She spoke about the real women who had helped her build this life, the ones who had been by her side through thick and thin. But as she said it, her eyes met mine for a brief moment. And in that instant, the warmth of the room seemed to freeze. Without missing a beat, she said, "You don't belong here." It wasn't the first time she'd dismissed me like this, but something about it hit differently today. I wasn't just an outsider at her wedding. I was invisible, reduced to nothing more than a background figure in her perfect narrative. Callista had always been the golden child, the one everyone admired, the one everyone believed, and I was the one who had been quietly pushed aside. I tried not to let her words affect me. After all, I had my own success, my own life. I had built my own empire, far away from her shadow. But it was hard not to feel the sting of being erased. Callista had spent years rewriting our story, making sure I was never the center of attention, always relegated to the background. It wasn't just at this wedding, it had been happening for as long as I could remember. And today, in this gilded room, I realized something important: I was done. I wasn't going to let her silence me anymore. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming what was mine. As I stood there, looking at her, I knew I wasn't just going to fade into the background like I always had. I would speak, I would act, and I would make sure the world knew the truth. The invitation had sat on my kitchen counter for days, taunting me. It was cheap, thin cardstock, no seal, my last name misspelled. It was as if the envelope itself was an afterthought. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I could have stayed home, carried on with my quiet life. But something in me snapped. The audacity of that invite, the subtle dismissal, made me want to see just how far Callista would go. I wasn't going to let her win this time. When the day arrived, I drove to the venue. My old Lexus, the only car in the parking lot that didn't gleam like it had been rented for the occasion. The valet barely looked at me as he handed me a ticket, almost as if I didn't belong in the same space as the other guests. I could feel the judgment in the air. It was in the way the staff looked at me, in the way people whispered as I passed by. They all assumed I wasn't important enough to be there. But I wasn't going anywhere, not this time. I walked into the venue with my head held high, despite the growing discomfort in my chest. My dress was simple, a pale green silk I'd sewn myself, with no sequins or plunging neckline to scream for attention. It hung straight down to my ankles, soft and clean, just like me. No one would notice me at first glance, and that was fine. I wasn't here for the attention. I was here to remind Callista, and everyone else in that room, that I had a place at the table too. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 4 days, unopened and waiting. It was just a thin, cheap piece of cardstock. Nothing special. Nothing to suggest it was more than a formal invitation to a wedding that, for all I cared, could have happened without me. But there it was, calling my attention every time I walked by. Its edges worn from where I had picked it up and put it down, trying to ignore it. The weight of it didn't just sit on my counter, it sat on my chest. The words inside were more than just an invitation. They were a statement. Callista's attempt at keeping me in my place, pushing me further to the margins of her perfect life. The envelope was almost laughable in its carelessness. My last name misspelled in a way that wasn't just a typo. It was a symbol, a deliberate mistake, an act of exclusion, a reminder that I didn't belong in her world. But what struck me more than the words themselves was the tone, the smugness embedded in that simple invitation. It wasn't a plea for me to come celebrate. It was a challenge, wrapped in polite formality, daring me to accept the invitation just to see what would happen. I should have thrown it away. I should have ignored it and kept on with my life, kept living quietly in the shadow of her empire, unnoticed and safe. But I couldn't. It wasn't about the wedding or the celebration. It was about the silent war she had waged against me. One I hadn't fought back against for years. How many times had I swallowed my pride, bowed my head, and let her win? Too many. That invite was the last straw, the audacity of it, the arrogance, the way it assumed my silence would continue. I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't going to be the forgotten one any longer. I grabbed the envelope and tore it open, feeling the crisp paper as if it held the power to rewrite everything. It wasn't sealed properly, like someone had simply slapped it together in a rush, careless in their dismissal of me. But as I unfolded it, I realized the message was clear. This wasn't just a wedding invitation. This was Callista's final attempt to remind me that I wasn't part of her world. She didn't care about me, she cared about control. But here's the thing. No one controls me anymore. Not her. Not anyone. This was no longer about being a guest at her wedding. It was about making a statement. She wanted to erase me, to keep me in the background like I had always been. But I was done. Done hiding. Done pretending I was okay with being her second thought. If she wanted to play this game, I was ready to show her what happens when you push someone too far. So, I did it. I decided to go, not because I had to, but because I needed to. I needed to see how far she would go. I needed to know if she truly believed I would stay silent, that I would just accept my place at the back of the room while she played the role of the perfect daughter, the perfect sister. Callista had lived her life believing that her success and her story were built on others' silence. But I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I arrived at the venue, feeling the weight of the moment before I even stepped out of the car. The luxury of it all, gleaming valet cars, expensive suits, perfectly coiffed guests, was a stark contrast to my own humble appearance. My old Lexus was the only car in the lot that didn't shine like it had just been leased for the event. As I parked, I could feel the eyes of the valet on me, a quick glance of judgment before he handed me a ticket for my car. He didn't ask my name, didn't even look at me long enough to offer a smile. His professionalism was a thin veneer for something else, something colder. "Ma'am, deliveries and vendor access are around back," he said, his tone polite but firm. I blinked, caught off guard for a second. "I'm a guest," I replied, my voice steady, but not quite as confident as I wanted it to be. The heat in my neck told me that this wasn't a simple mistake. No, it was more than that. It was an unspoken rule: you don't belong here. He didn't budge. Instead, he just gestured to the side. "You'll need to check in with the coordinator." I could feel the sting of that moment, the unmistakable feeling of being marked as an outsider. But I swallowed it down. I wasn't about to let him see how much it hurt. I nodded, accepting his instructions without another word, and walked around to the side entrance of the venue. As I made my way past the line of caterers unloading silver trays from trucks, the scent of food mingled with the sweet and fragrant flowers that had been carefully arranged. It felt like I was walking through the back of the stage, far away from the spotlight. And maybe that's exactly where they wanted me, out of sight, out of mind. But I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't going to let them push me aside any longer. I walked by an open door and paused. Taking a moment to look at myself in the mirror, I looked fine, neat, clean, put together. But I didn't shine like the other women who had entered before me. Their dresses were elaborate, their heels high, their lives polished in ways I hadn't been able to afford. And for a brief second, I almost considered leaving. The thought crossed my mind I could just walk away. I could turn around and drive back to my quiet life. I could let Callista and her perfect world collapse without me. But then I remembered something my father used to say. He always told me, "You don't go to the table for food. You don't go to be thanked. You go to remind them that you earned your seat." It was a lesson that had been buried under years of silence. But standing there, I felt it rise again, stronger than ever. So I kept walking, one step after another. I made my way toward the check-in table. The coordinator didn't even look up at first. She was too busy adjusting table numbers on her tablet. She barely noticed me approach, as though I wasn't worth her attention, but when she finally turned to greet me, her eyes flickered over the list. She squinted at my name, and I could almost see her hesitation. "Spell that again," she asked, her voice flat, her tone devoid of warmth. I repeated it, steady. She tapped the screen of her tablet, then paused. "Okay, you're on here, but it's marked with an asterisk," she said, barely looking at me. "You're in overflow seating. It's toward the back of the garden patio. You'll have a view of the ceremony. But it's the last row. No apology. No recognition. Just a quick smile, like it was some kind of band-aid on a wound that didn't matter." It was hard to ignore the sting, but I forced myself to nod and smile back, the same way I always had. Quiet, composed, invisible. They were doing it again, pushing me aside, making me feel like I didn't deserve to be there. But that only made me more determined. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't going to shrink back. I was going to stay. They handed me a paper wristband, just a flimsy piece of paper that barely stayed on my wrist. Everyone else had digital lanyards, gleaming rose gold with their engraved initials. Mine was nothing more than an afterthought, like I was still being treated as an outsider, as someone who wasn't quite invited, but still tolerated. I looked at the wristband for a moment before I followed the usher through a narrow hallway, past the kitchen staff and silver trays, away from the celebration and closer to the shadows. But I wasn't just walking to the back of the room. I was walking to take my place in this story. They wanted me to be invisible, but I wasn't going to let them erase me anymore. The hallway felt like a different world, dimly lit, quiet, and far from the bustling celebration in the main ballroom. The further I walked, the more the noise of the wedding faded into the background. Swallowed up by the silence of this hidden corridor, it was as though I had slipped behind the scenes of a play, no longer a part of the audience, but relegated to the shadows. As I passed by the catering staff, unloading trays and preparing for the evening's feast, I felt a cold sense of alienation settle over me. These were the workers, the ones who had their roles, their places. But they didn't get to shine. They were essential to the event, yet invisible in their own right. Just like me. I wasn't part of the glittering crowd. I wasn't a guest at the head table. I wasn't even close enough to the action to matter. But that's exactly what they wanted, wasn't it? For me to feel small, for me to accept my place at the edge of it all, barely seen. They wanted me to fade away, unnoticed and unimportant. The more I thought about it, the more my pulse quickened. They didn't understand who I was or what I was capable of. Callista had spent years building this perfect world. But what she didn't know was that I was about to turn it all upside down. I reached a small alcove near the wine bar, where the noise of the reception hummed faintly in the background. I paused for a moment, staring at the reflection of myself in the mirror hanging on the wall. There I was, clean, composed, in a dress that I had made myself. A dress that didn't scream for attention, but it was enough. It was my statement, quiet but firm. A symbol of the work I had put in over the years. A reminder that I was capable of creating something beautiful with my own hands. Even when the world around me was trying to keep me small, in that moment, I almost turned around. The idea of leaving crossed my mind again, but this time it didn't feel like a solution. It felt like failure. What had my father always told me? You don't walk away from the table. Odellis. You go because you've earned your seat. And I had earned mine, no matter how many times Callista had tried to push me aside. The hallway stretched ahead of me, and I could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps echoing against the walls. For a second, I thought about the years of silence. The years I had spent shrinking into the background, allowing her to overshadow me. But no more. I wasn't going to walk away now. Not when I could finally take my place. I walked past the kitchen staff, past the noise of the clinking glasses and the soft hum of the servers as they prepared for the next course. I could feel the weight of their stares. But I didn't look back. I wasn't here to be small. I was here to make a statement. And no matter how many whispers followed me, I wasn't going to let them drown me out. At the check-in table, I had been treated as an afterthought. Now, in this quiet, hidden space, I had nothing but space to think. And as I walked deeper into the venue, past the stark, utilitarian back hallways, I felt something shift inside me. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long began to lift. The moment I had been waiting for was coming closer. This wasn't just about a seat at the table anymore. This was about standing tall, about showing up for myself, for the years I had spent pretending that silence was enough. Callista might have tried to erase me from the picture, but I wasn't going to let her. The overflow seating they mentioned was as far from the ceremony as you could get without being outside the venue entirely. I was ushered into a space at the far end of the garden patio, near the back, where the elegant ceremony was only a distant hum. The chairs around me were pushed aside as if they were an afterthought, set up not for guests, but for those who were tolerated, not truly welcomed. As I walked through the rows, I felt the weight of every pair of eyes that avoided me, every polite smile that was just thinly veiled pity. I didn't belong in their world, not in the way they had imagined it in. Callista's world, a perfect bubble of wealth and control, didn't have room for someone like me, someone who could still see through the cracks, still understand the falseness of it all. And the further I walked, the more my steps carried me away from that glittering facade. The table I was led to was tucked away in the corner, next to a column, almost as if it was designed to be ignored. The other guests seated there were more than aware of where they were. They could feel the awkwardness in the air. I could feel it too. It hung there like a cloud. I pulled out a chair with deliberate care, not rushing, not letting the humiliation sting me more than it already had. This wasn't my first time being an afterthought, but today it would be my last. The chair I chose was clean, but bore a faint red stain on the side, as though someone had used it before and hadn't bothered to clean it properly. A waiter rushed over, wiping it away quickly, apologizing with a strained smile. "Sorry about that," he said. Didn't realize this was a guest table. The irony was thick in the air. They had set me apart so much that even the staff thought I wasn't a proper guest. "No worries," I replied, my voice calm, but the words felt like ice in my mouth. They didn't even bother to get my name right on the little card beside my plate. It read, "Oh, Shippy." I didn't correct it. There was no point in pointing out the absurdity anymore. I was already used to being misread, misunderstood, erased. I sat quietly at the table, my hands folded in my lap. I kept my head steady, my gaze focused ahead. The laughter and clinking glasses of the main event seemed miles away. I could hear Callista's voice in the background, smooth and practiced, thanking her guests for their support, for being there to witness her success. But I wasn't there to be thanked. I wasn't there for any of it. I was here because I had something to say, something they weren't ready to hear. Around me, the guests at the table whispered to each other, their voices low enough to feel like they weren't meant to be overheard. "Isn't that her sister?" one of them murmured, their words carrying just enough volume to sting. "Why is she sitting by the bathroom?" another asked, laughter bubbling up afterward. I clenched my fist around my glass, feeling the cool chill of the crystal against my palm. They didn't know the first thing about me. They didn't know how much of me was still hidden behind the facade of calm. And then came the moment, the one I had been bracing myself for. Callista took the stage, her voice filling the air as the room fell silent. She thanked everyone for being there, for making the day so special. Her words were practiced, polished, designed to make people feel like they had been invited into something intimate, something important. But then, almost as an afterthought, she added a line that cut through the air with surgical precision. "And of course," she said, her tone sweet as honey, but her eyes scanning the room in a way that made my skin crawl, to those who surprised us by showing up even when we didn't think they would. She paused, her gaze flickering over my direction, just long enough to make sure everyone saw. A sharp laugh rippled through the crowd, followed by a chorus of whispers. "Some people," she continued, her smile widening, "just don't know when they're not invited to shine." The laughter was louder this time, sharper. It was cruel, and it was public. It wasn't the first time Callista had used me as the butt of her jokes. But this time, something inside me snapped. I didn't flinch. I didn't look around or shrink back into my seat like I had done so many times before. I stayed still, calm, poised. But inside, something was shifting, something deep. I had been invisible for too long. She had made me the joke, the invisible sibling, the one who didn't fit into her perfect world. But not anymore. I reached under the table and felt the small, unassuming package that I had brought with me. It was simple, no glittery wrapping, no bright ribbons. Just plain craft paper tied with twine. A gift, yes, but it wasn't for her. It was for me. I stood up, my hands steady, my heart calm. I walked toward the gift table without looking back, without giving Callista or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me falter. The whispers grew louder, the cameras flashed, and the stares followed me. But this time, I didn't care. The gift table was set at the front of the room, a long marble slab filled with shiny, oversized boxes wrapped in satin ribbon and velvet. It was meant to be a showcase of generosity, a way for guests to demonstrate their wealth and status. But when I placed my small, unadorned package on that table, it felt like a statement. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't impressive in the way the other gifts were, but it was real. The crinkled paper, the twine wrapped around it, the simple card with nothing but my name on it, Odelis Varnell, it didn't need anything else. I turned back toward my seat, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. I wasn't here to be the center of attention. I wasn't here for their approval. But the way Callista's voice had dripped with sarcasm. Earlier, her public humiliation of me had sparked something deep inside. I wasn't about to be silenced. Not anymore. Callista. Still under the glow of the chandeliers, walked toward the gift table, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't interested in the gift. She was interested in turning it into a spectacle, something she could laugh at with her perfect guests. She approached the small package, her smile wide and rehearsed. Her voice was sugary sweet as she picked it up, speaking into the phone of one of her friends who had already begun filming. "Oh, wow," she said, raising her eyebrows. "Would you look at that?" My sister brought me a lesson in humility. The laughter from her group followed. It was sharp, mocking, the kind of laughter that stung even if you didn't let it show. And for a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But I stood still. I kept my face calm. I didn't flinch. Callista didn't even open the package. She didn't have to. It wasn't about what was inside. It was about the public shaming, the way she used me as a prop in her perfect world. "Let's make sure we sort this one appropriately," she said, handing it to a staff member with the same dismissive tone she used when telling me I wasn't worthy of a seat at the table. The staff member took the gift without a second glance, disappearing with it behind the curtain. But I wasn't done yet. As I walked back to my table, I could hear the whispers pick up again. The guests at the table beside me were leaning in, pulling out their phones. "Wait, did you see that? Is that from Goodwill?" One of the women giggled, snapping a photo. Somebody thought a compostable envelope was luxury yikes. Another added, "When you're not rich but still want to look self-righteous at a wedding." They were laughing. Callista was laughing. But I wasn't shrinking. I was standing tall. I didn't care what they said, what they thought. Their mockery couldn't touch me. It wasn't about them. It was about what I was about to do. I stayed in my seat for a moment, the hum of the reception continuing around me, the cameras flashing, the chatter rising in volume. But none of it mattered. It wasn't real. What was real was the quiet that was settling inside me. I was done playing along with their rules. I was done being the joke. I reached down under my chair, pulled out the small package, and stood up again, moving without hesitation. My steps were steady now. My purpose was clear. I walked through the ballroom, my gaze fixed ahead. No more hiding, no more shrinking. I wasn't going to let them erase me anymore. I wasn't going to be the background noise in their perfect little world. As I walked past the buffet, past the sparkling wine glasses and the socialites who had whispered and laughed about me earlier, I made my way to the front of the room. I was walking directly into the heart of the event. But this time, it wasn't to be ignored. This time, it was to take back my narrative. When I reached the gift table, I saw Callista standing with her friends, still laughing, still pretending that everything was under control. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. The package I'd brought wasn't just a gift. It was the start of a new chapter, the moment I had been waiting for. The staff member who had taken the gift earlier was standing at the edge of the table. I walked right up to him. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. "I'll be taking that back." He blinked, looking confused. "Ma'am." "I think it was—" "No," I said gently. "It wasn't a donation. It's personal." He nodded, stepped back behind the curtain, and returned moments later, the small package still wrapped tightly in the same crinkled craft paper. It hadn't been opened. And that was just fine. I didn't need anyone to see what was inside. What mattered was that I had reclaimed it, taken back what had been treated like a joke, like something disposable. As I walked back to my seat, the murmurs and whispers followed me. The laughter had shifted now. Some still whispered behind their phones, but now there was a sense of uncertainty in the air. I had stopped being the joke. I had stopped being the invisible sister. And what Callista didn't know was that I wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. I was here to stay. The ballroom felt like a circus, a spectacle built on the facade of wealth and perfection. People moved in polished circles, laughing and exchanging pleasantries as if nothing was wrong. But beneath the surface, the air was thick with tension. I could feel it in the way the whispers followed me, in the way the phones were still pointed at me as if I was some reality TV spectacle. The moment I had been dreading, the moment I had known would come, was fast approaching. Callista had done everything to ensure I stayed small, to make sure that no one would ever see me as anything more than a footnote in her perfect narrative. And yet, despite everything, I wasn't the one shrinking anymore. She was. The cracks were beginning to show, even if no one could quite put their finger on it just yet. But they would. They all would. I took my seat again, back at the table where I'd been quietly shoved, hidden away like an inconvenient truth. My package was still tucked under my arm, the twine feeling heavier than it had before. I wasn't just holding a simple gift. I was holding the key to everything. This was no longer just about a wedding. This was about truth. My truth. And it was time to let it be seen. Callista was up on stage again, soaking in the attention, her smile wide and flawless. She was playing the role of the perfect bride, perfect daughter, perfect sister, but something in her posture was off. The way she glanced around at her guests, the way her eyes flicked over the crowd, it all betrayed the anxiety she was trying so hard to hide. She could play the part, but she couldn't escape the truth. I didn't wait for the MC to introduce her. I didn't need anyone to give me permission. I stood up again, making my way through the crowd, my steps deliberate, my heart steady. Each movement was measured, each breath was purposeful. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to let Callista control the story. It was time for me to speak, to take my place in the narrative, even if she had tried so hard to erase me. The room grew quiet as I approached the stage. Callista didn't see me coming. She was too focused on herself, too wrapped up in the praise being heaped upon her. But when I reached the mic, when my fingers brushed against it, she froze. The room held its breath. The cameras followed me, the whispers rising like a wave. I didn't hesitate. I looked straight at Callista, at the life she had built on lies, on stolen moments, on my silence, and I spoke. You all know me as Odellis Shipley. I began, my voice calm, controlled, but cutting through the air like a blade. Some of you may not know me at all, and some of you may have been told things about me that aren't true. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Callista's eyes narrowed, and I saw her smile falter, just for a second. But I didn't stop. I'm here tonight not to disrupt your celebration. Callista, I continued, looking directly at her. I'm here to tell the truth, because you've built your life, your so-called empire, on my silence. You've used my name, my capital, my work, without my consent. I could see the color drain from her face. She wasn't ready for this. But I wasn't giving her a choice. I nodded toward the screens that were still running through a slideshow of family moments perfect, curated images that left me out of the story entirely, the same images that had been manipulated, cropped, and edited to erase me from Callista's version of reality. You've erased me from every part of your story, I said, but I'm not going anywhere anymore. Not this time. With a steady hand, I reached into the small manila folder I had been holding all night, the folder that was filled with evidence emails, contracts, and signed agreements that proved everything Callista had done, the fraud she had committed, the money she had taken without my knowledge. I began to lay the documents on the table for everyone to see. This, I said, pulling out the first page, is a forgery. I looked at the crowd, at Callista's stunned face, and the murmurs that began to rise as they saw the papers. This is the document you used to steal from me. This is the shell company you created with my name. And this, I said, holding up a third page, is where you used my funds to build your so-called empire. The room was silent now. The whispers had stopped. Callista's friends, her supporters, the people who had all been on her side, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. They could see it now. The truth was there, plain and clear, written in black and white, and they couldn't ignore it. I turned to face Callista once again, this time with a cold gehumor, hard clarity in my eyes. You've built your empire on lies, Callista, but this isn't just fraud. This is theft. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences of what you've done. Her jaw clenched, and her eyes burned with fury. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The reality of the situation was sinking in. The perfect image she had worked so hard to create was crumbling before her eyes. I didn't wait for her to respond. I wasn't interested in her excuses. I wasn't interested in her apologies or her fake tears. This was over. With that, I stepped off the stage, my heart still steady. The whispers followed me, but this time, they were different. This time, they weren't about mocking me. They were about understanding that the truth had been spoken, that the lie had been exposed, and I wasn't done. I wasn't finished until I had made sure the world knew who I was, who I had always been, and what I had the power to do. The room was thick with tension as I walked away from the stage. The hush that had fallen over the ballroom was almost deafening, and I could feel every eye on me as I made my way toward the back of the room. Callista had tried to paint me as the villain, but the truth had already taken root. Her perfect world was cracking, and she could do nothing to stop it. I passed by the guests, their faces a mixture of confusion, surprise, and disbelief. Callista's friends, the ones who had once showered her with praise, were now whispering among themselves, their voices hushed, their laughter silenced. The carefully curated image she had built was slowly unraveling before their eyes. The truth had a way of doing that it had a way of cutting through the facade and exposing everything that had been hidden beneath the surface. I could feel the weight of their stares, but this time, it didn't bother me. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the quiet sister, standing in the background while Callista basked in the spotlight. No, tonight was different. Tonight, I was the one who had spoken the truth, and nothing would ever be the same. I didn't look back as I walked past the tables and the guests who had once looked down on me. Callista was still standing on the stage, her smile forced and brittle, trying to hold it together as the chaos around her grew. But I could see the cracks in her armor, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the microphone, the way she searched the room for someone to rescue her from the consequences of her actions. No one was coming to her rescue now. She was on her own. As I made my way to the back of the ballroom, I saw Colleen Wexler standing by the door. She had been watching from the sidelines, her eyes locked on me as I exposed the truth. Her smile was small, but knowing understanding. She had been there when I had made a difference, when I had fought for what was right. And now, she was here to witness the aftermath. That was something, Colleen said, her voice low, but filled with admiration. She stepped forward and offered me a quiet nod, as though acknowledging the weight of what had just happened. I don't think Callista saw that coming. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. I hadn't done this for her. I hadn't done this for anyone. I had done it for me. For my own sense of justice. For the years I had spent in silence. For the years I had allowed Callista to write me out of our shared story. Colleen leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You know, you've got more allies in this room than you think," she said. "It's just a matter of who's brave enough to stand with you." I felt a spark of something inside me hope. Maybe. Or maybe it was something more powerful. It wasn't just about exposing Callista for the fraud she was. It was about reclaiming what was mine. And I wasn't going to stop now. The sound of the clinking glasses and distant chatter from the reception began to fade into the background. Everything felt distant now, as though the chaos in the ballroom no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had taken my place. I wasn't the one pushed aside anymore. I wasn't the one being erased. I had made sure of that. I walked past Colleen and headed toward the exit. My steps slow but deliberate. I wasn't in a hurry to leave, not yet. I needed a moment. I needed to breathe. The weight of everything that had happened was still settling on my shoulders, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like a blanket, and I stood for a moment, letting the calm of the vineyard wash over me. The quiet hum of the night seemed so far removed from the chaos I had left behind in the ballroom. It was as if the world was offering me a moment of peace, something I hadn't had in years. I pulled my phone from my bag and saw a message from Simone, one of my old assistants at the foundation. She had sent me a PDF with a subject line that made my heart skip a beat. "You didn't authorize this grant, did you?" I opened the attachment, and my stomach dropped. It was a grant approval letter, dated from last fiscal year, with my name listed as the chief officer of a project I had never heard of. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine, but it was a near-perfect imitation of my handwriting. My blood ran cold as I scanned the document, $215,000 in seed funds, sent to a new eco-social startup led by none other than Callista Shipley. I could feel the fury rising inside me, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't surprised. I had suspected something like this for a while, but now I had the proof. Callista hadn't just borrowed from my dressmakers or used my name as a backdrop for her lies. She had stolen from me in ways I hadn't even imagined. I texted Simone back. "I need all the paperwork from FY 2021 and the LLC file for Caloris Inc. Get it to me as soon as possible." Simone replied almost immediately. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" I stared at my phone for a long moment, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. Callista had pushed me too far this time, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. I typed one last message. I should have done this a year ago. And with that, I walked back into the twilight, leaving behind the wreckage of Callista's world, ready to rebuild my own. The cool night air hit me like a wave as I stepped away from the chaos inside. The sharp click of my heels echoed across the stone path, and for a moment, I let the silence envelop me. The frantic energy of the wedding, the crowd, and the spectacle inside were all fading away. It was almost as if the world had paused, just for a moment, to let me breathe. But I knew the calm wouldn't last. Callista was no stranger to creating her own version of reality. She had always manipulated the narrative, bending the truth until it fit her image of perfection. But tonight, I had flipped the script. I had shattered the carefully curated world she had worked so hard to build. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Colleen. "You made your mark tonight." "Oh, Dallas, Callista's not going to let this go easily." I had no illusions about Callista's reaction. She wasn't the type to accept defeat, especially not in front of an audience. Her world was built on her ability to control the story, to rewrite the truth in a way that made her look flawless. And now, that story was slipping through her fingers. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't take back what had already been exposed. The lies were out in the open. I glanced back at the grand ballroom one last time, the light shining brightly through the tall windows, as if the world inside was still going on without a hitch. But the energy had shifted. The guests were no longer watching with the same rapt attention. The whispers had grown louder, and I could feel the eyes of the room on me. Callista had lost her grip, and I knew she would fight to regain it. But the truth had already been planted in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the fallout. I didn't want to be a part of her drama anymore. I didn't want to play the role of the sister who was ignored, the one who was always just a footnote in her story. I was done with the games, done with being erased, done with pretending that I didn't matter. Callista might have tried to make me the villain in her fairy tale, but I wasn't buying it anymore. And neither would anyone else. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to wait around for Callista to fix things, for her to smooth over the damage she had caused. The work was already in progress. I didn't need anyone's permission to claim what was rightfully mine. I had fought too long in the shadows, too long in silence. And now it was time to bring the light into every corner of my story. I pulled up the documents again on my phone, looking over the email that Simone had sent me, the grant approval that Callista had forged with my name. The sense of betrayal had settled in. But it wasn't the anger I had expected. It was more a quiet resolve. This wasn't just a fight for what was mine. It was a fight for my right to exist in the story, for the world to finally see me as I was, not as Callista had painted me. As I stood on the vineyard's edge, looking out at the quiet landscape, I knew the battle wasn't over. Callista might have thought she could hide behind a carefully constructed image, but the truth had a way of creeping through the cracks. And once the light had shone on it, there was no going back. It was out there, and I had already taken the first steps toward reclaiming everything she had sown. The air was crisp, and the stars above were beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. I wasn't afraid of what was to come. In fact, I was more certain than ever. Callista could try to fight back, but the truth was already on my side. And in the end, truth had a way of winning. It always did. My phone buzzed once more, this time with a message from Everett, Callista's fiancé. His name was familiar, but his face was a blur in my memory. I hadn't paid much attention to him until now. The message was short, almost cryptic. "I need to talk to you. Please don't do anything rash." I read it twice, then set my phone down in my lap. This wasn't about rash decisions. This was about clarity, about the truth coming to light after years of silence and manipulation. Whatever Callista had planned, whatever she was hoping to salvage, she couldn't undo what had been done. Not now. I turned my phone off and tucked it back into my bag, stepping into the night with a quiet sense of finality. No more hiding, no more playing small. This was my moment. I was ready for whatever came next. Callista had thought she could use me to further her empire, to erase me from the story, but the truth had other plans, and I wasn't done yet. The vineyard was still, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The world felt like it had paused, as if the earth itself was waiting for something. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, trying to steady my thoughts. But inside, everything was alive with the rush of emotions that had built up over years: anger, betrayal, loss, but most of all, resolve. I had done what I needed to do. The truth was out. There was no turning back now. Callista would never admit it, but she knew it, too. She knew the moment I stepped off that stage and exposed everything, the moment the truth came rushing to light, that her carefully curated empire had been shaken. She had always believed she could control everything: how people saw her, how they saw me, how they saw us. But now everything she had worked for was hanging by a thread. And there was nothing she could do to change that. My phone buzzed again, interrupting the stillness of the moment. This time, it was a message from Everett, the fiancé. I hadn't expected to hear from him, but after what had happened, I shouldn't have been surprised. "Oh, Dallas, I know you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle things. Please, let's talk before it escalates further." I stared at the message for a moment, my mind racing. The last time I had seen Everett, he was standing beside Callista, smiling, unaware of the deceit swirling just beneath the surface of their perfect life. And now, here he was, reaching out to me like he could fix this. But this wasn't his mess to clean up. This was Callista's doing, not mine. She was the one who had lied, who had stolen from me, who had tried to erase me from the story. If Everett truly cared, he would have seen it long before tonight. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Callista had used everyone around her to prop up her illusion of success. But she hadn't counted on the fact that the truth was far stronger than any of the lies she had told. It had taken years to get here. But tonight, I had finally taken back control. I looked down at the small manila folder I had been carrying all evening, the same folder that had held the evidence. The documents that proved everything Callista had done. It was still with me, tucked under my arm, a reminder of the power I now wielded. The truth was mine to share, and no one could take that away from me. Not Callista, not Everett, not anyone. I thought about walking away, about leaving this behind and moving on with my life, but I couldn't. Not yet. Callista had made this personal. She had tried to erase me, to push me into the background of her perfect life. But now, everything had changed. She couldn't just sweep this under the rug. No matter how hard she tried, the damage had been done. The world would know the truth. And I wasn't going to let her make me the villain. I had earned my place at the table, and I wasn't going anywhere. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom, my footsteps steady and resolute. The night wasn't over. But I knew one thing for sure: Callista's world was crumbling. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The lies had been exposed. The truth was in the open. And now, the world would see her for who she really was. Inside, the sound of conversations and clinking glasses filled the air. But there was a different energy now. Callista was no longer the star of the show. She was just a woman who had tried to build her life on lies. And now the truth was threatening to pull it all apart. I didn't care what happened next. I had done what I came to do. I had spoken my truth. And that was enough. As I walked back into the ballroom, I felt the eyes of the room on me once again. But this time, it wasn't with judgment or pity. It was with recognition. They knew now. The whispers were no longer about mocking me. They were about understanding. About seeing the woman who had been erased from her own story. And now, the world could see me for who I truly was. Callista was still standing near the stage, her smile now thin and brittle. She looked like a woman who had just realized she had lost control of everything she thought she owned. The light had shifted. The attention that once focused solely on her was now spreading, slowly, towards me. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't need to. Callista knew exactly what was happening, and deep down, she knew that the game she had been playing was over. I walked past her, my head held high, a quiet strength in every step. The world had just shifted, and I was no longer just the sister in the background. I was the one who had taken back control, the one who had shown the world what truly mattered. And Callista, she was just another character in a story that had already been written. This was my moment. This was my truth, and no one could take that away from me.